lots of conversations lately about programming and some of the different therapeutic things actually that you can do within your programming, or things that we do to avoid getting hurt. But inevitably, you stay in the game long enough, you're working out hard enough, you're challenging yourself enough. Um, Things pop up, and you don't necessarily get injured, but things will ache, they'll start to hurt. Your brain will start sending signals that to basically tell you that's not cool. And pain is a great inhibitor to keep you from hurting yourself or damaging yourself. So if you're like me, generally I ignore that for just about as long as I can, and I try to fight it. And I wind up putting myself in a position where really I have to really unfuck myself over a very long period of time versus really listening and paying attention right from the get-go and addressing stuff. So I've had a few DMs lately, and we've had a couple of emails about people just going, hey, man, I'm working this program right now, but I'm really challenged with this thing. Well, it's like shoulder pain or knee pain, and I can't figure it out. And inevitably, they've tried to self-diagnose. They've tried to kind of figure it out. And, they're making assumptions, and they really just don't have enough information under their belt. So I think over time under their belt in order to make some like informed decisions, and they're not necessarily ready, wanting, or might not have the availability to go see a specialist, somebody that can assess them. So one of the things that has popped up for me again, it kind of comes and goes. I know what sets it off is elbow pain. And I got 2 questions last week about elbow pain. Like, I have this elbow pain, and so anytime I'm pushing, pulling, going into extension, like onto if you're in a push-up position on the floor, my elbow really starts to bother me. Or if I'm rowing, pulling dumbbells, bars, using handles or whatever on cable machines, really bothering me. So I want to talk today about working through and around elbow pain. Because I think it's pretty common. I know I've had issues with it. I know each of you have at separate times. So just so people and give people some solutions so they don't have to stop working out. Because you don't have to stop working out to get better. But there are some very specific things you can do, which I'd like to outline to alleviate some of it while you're doing your typical stuff alongside, hey, here's some stuff you can do very specifically to start working on making that better. But to understand elbow pain better, we probably need to understand kind of what's going on at the elbow and what's causing that pain. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cece. So
elbow pain, it can be really challenging, and it can be for some individuals very debilitating. But if you're dealing with that, then there's a variety of things that you can utilize and try to work around when working out. So you can get elbow pain medially or laterally. And what that means is either on the inside of your elbow, if your palm is facing up towards the ceiling. You can get elbow pain medially or laterally. And what that means is if you put your arms straight out in front of you, palms facing up, you can get pain on the inside of your elbow, just below your elbow joint, or you can get it on the lateral side, which is the outer side, just below your elbow joint. A lot of times this is caused from overuse, not having enough either strength and endurance in your grip, or having weakness, I guess, which would be the same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, they're counterparts.
So, or if all of a sudden you're doing a lot more gripping and pulling in your programming than you're used to. Some workarounds for this, when you're holding your barbell or your dumbbell, you can use straps. One thing is you can use straps. I don't know. Have you two ever tried using straps when you're lifting?
I've used the straps at one point. I actually used hooks once.
Yeah.
Once. I threw those things away. Like, I never used them again. It feels really weird to me. But yeah, I've used straps.
Yeah, so
lifting straps.
The strap wraps around your wrist, and then there's a tail on it, and you take that tail and you wrap it around your dumbbell, or you wrap it around your barbell, and then grab your dumbbell or your barbell with your thumbs and fingers closed, instead of taking like what we call a monkey grip, where you're just holding on with a false grip, where you're just holding on with your fingertips. That type of grip actually puts a lot more stress on the inside of your elbow when you hold the monkey grip.
The monkey gripping could be creating or at least exacerbating your medial elbow pain. Yep.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So use your thumbs. Another workaround would be using a counterforce strap. So a counterforce strap is a strap you would hear it called a tennis elbow strap or a elbow or golfer's elbow strap. It's just a strap that's maybe an inch to an inch and a half in width, and it literally goes around your arm and it has a Velcro piece. And it has a little soft pillow in it usually, and that little pillow goes right over the site of discomfort or the site of pain that you're having. And what it does is it helps disperse the forces that are applied when you're gripping and pulling. So it's applying pressure there, and the forces from pulling and holding are then dispersed to somewhere else along those muscle tendon lines.
So yeah, that's a lot, but effectively, like let's just say for the layperson, if your tendons and muscles connect at that bone on the inside of your elbow that you can feel when you have your palm facing up out in front of you, and they go all the way down to your fingertips.
Yep,
correct.
Right? All the way down to your fingertips. The attachment point is the elbow, that bone you can feel. So if you take this little strap, right, and it's got this little, for lack of a better term, you said a pillow or like a bubble.
Like a little burst up.
Yeah, it's got like a little bubble.
No, the strap.
I know.
Oh.
Yeah, it looks like just a little marble full of air or whatever. Sometimes they have like a
Like
gel.
a Nike pump up.
That's exactly what it looks like.
There we
Going
go.
back to the Nike pumps. That would go directly at the point where you're feeling the pain, just below that joint. And so effectively what that does now is that creates tension there versus at the bone or the bony attachment. And so what that does is it relieves the pressure between where that little bubble is touching and that pressure point is touching and that
Muscle attachment.
the muscle attachment, the bone, and this is likely where the point of pain is in the elbow, which is very common.
Very common.
So that's another workaround. Right?
Yes. And the other thing is when you're using one of those straps, you're going to have to play with the tension as far as how tight that strap is. Personally, when I've used one in the past, I really crank on it and I get it as tight as I can to the point where sometimes the veins are popping out in my hand and my forearm, but I don't keep it there the entire workout. I only tighten it as tight as I need to for the lift that I'm doing, and then when I'm done, I release it.
Good point. So it's a crutch or a workaround for a very, very small amount of time.
Correct.
This is important. This goes back to like getting a chiropractic adjustment. This is a quick, application that now there are other things we need to do around this in order for this to get better. It's not better. You just kind of bypass the problem for a minute.
Correct.
Right? And you're not leaving it on there. Yeah, the other thing I found I found problematic with that is like if you start at the beginning of your workout with that strap on, and this is why I don't like them, you start to get a muscle pump, right?
Yep.
Blood circulation starts to flow into that area, and it starts to get really uncomfortable. So not only are you cutting off the circulation, you're starting to now put pressure on nerves, and other things start to bother you at this point.
Yes, but also to that, think about blood flow restrictive training.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue there could
for repair, right? So yes, you have an issue on your medial elbow, and you're using your counterforce strap to get you through the workout, but at the same time, you're releasing that pressure, and then you have a huge rush of blood to replenish the area to help bring in nutrients so that healing can take place or at least help with.
Exactly. It also stimulates a higher intensity of training physiologically
Right,
with a lighter weight.
Yeah, right. And so for those of you that don't know about blood flow restriction, you may have seen this where people will tie bands around just above their bicep or below their shoulder.
Quads.
Yeah, quads and whatever. And they'll
appendages.
Yeah, whatever.
Calves, yeah.
They'll drive as much blood through a heavy to, maybe a drop set even. And
so it's usually a 30, the first set's 30. You increase the weight, and the next 3 sets are 15 reps at 30 seconds rest.
Right. So you're just filling those guys full of blood. And it's painful.
It's painful.
But and then ultimately you take that off and there's a huge rush of blood in. And so you're volumizing the muscle cell. And so to your point, when you're doing that, you're driving more circulation into that area, which could help with the healing process if we're addressing the healing process piece. So you jumped right in there with, hey, here's some workarounds. Here's some things that you could do. Like you could go to the drugstore today or whatever, and you could get one of these little straps. You could throw it on to see how it works for you. But there's a few other ways if you don't have that. So again, medial versus lateral elbow pain. Talk about that.
So the other workarounds. So there's another one. This is my favorite, which a lot of people, your average individual aren't familiar with. When you're gripping and you're taking a thumbed grip, not a monkey grip, depending on the site of injury or pain that you're having, if it's on the inside or the outside, when you go to grip, if you're having medial elbow pain on the inside of your elbow, what you want to do is still take a full grip, but try to squeeze more through your index finger and your second finger and your thumb. Put more pressure there. That will actually help to alleviate the stress on the inside of your elbow. And vice versa. If you're having some lateral elbow pain, then you want to squeeze more through your pinky or your fifth finger and your ring finger and your thumb, and not so much through your index and middle fingers. So if you were to actually try that, let's just put your arms out in front of you and make a fist. And then squeeze through your thumb and your index finger and your middle finger. And with your other hand, gently lay it around your elbow. Okay? And do like a little pump action. Where do you feel the muscles activating with your index finger and your middle finger?
Yeah, it's going to be more lateral.
So you're not using your ring finger and your pinky as much. Now, go ahead and try your thumb, pinky, and ring finger and squeeze. Where do you feel the most action? You should feel it on the inside of your elbow, right? So when you're pulling or you're holding or you're gripping and you have medial elbow pain, use your index finger, middle finger, and your thumb. Put more pressure there. If you're having lateral elbow pain, use your pinky and your ring finger and your thumb.
Yeah, these and going back to how the tendon and the muscles run through the chain here, this would make sense. All my flexors, right, the ones that make my fingers bend and my wrist bend, right, or flex, right?
All medial.
Yeah, those are the ones that we're talking about here. They're overworked or they're weak. They lack strength. However you want to look at it, it's all of those things. So taking pressure off of them in the particular exercise to not overstrain them can be helpful as a workaround. It's not a solution.
And you can use that grip, altered grip, with your counterforce brace. So those two together should be able to alleviate a lot of discomfort.
They'll get you some mileage, right? Yeah.
For sure. And then we can get into actually why is this hurting and how can we strengthen it and not need a workaround, right? Yep. So when we're looking at medial flexors, right, overworked, lateral extensors overworked. So if I'm on a keyboard, probably going to have more lateral, golfing, whatever, inside gripping.
Yeah, because if you're on the keyboards, because you're in flexion, right? You're in flexion all the time. Like you're sitting down, your wrists are flexed. You're, for lack of a better term, you look limp-wristed, right? As you're banging away on the keyboard.
Some people might be extended and then down. So you have so many different ways. That's
a really good point because they've got their workstation set up to where now the keyboard is lifted and they're trying to stay neutral, but the reality of it is now they're in wrist extension.
And it's passive, right? So their body's just sitting here, it wants to be here, right? And then you start getting work and you have these pains. There's a lot of things you can have. The finger extensors, right? It has a rubber piece,
like a rubber band,
goes over each finger and then has an adjunct to each piece.
Like a webbing.
Exactly. So you're just spreading out. You can go into flexion. But the reason why these things are hurting is it's an overuse injury. It's like a baseball pitcher that's, going all season and not strengthening his external rotator, internal rotator, right?
And decelerators, yeah.
Same thing, right? Where desk jockey, you guys are overworking your wrists and your forearms. You need to exercise and work those.
So I think where this came up, going back to the elbow pain piece, was I had been, and we just did a podcast on the pull-up, but I'd been talking about that in other context, and the people that reached out had just were trying to improve their pull-ups. So they all of a sudden they're trying to do more than they were doing before, and lo and behold, here comes the elbow pain, which is not something we addressed on the podcast itself. They're just now they're gripping, right? They're trying to support their body weight, pull through space, and we talked in depth about the mechanics there and how to and how not to do that. But this is where that came up for them. Came up for me actually getting back on the bicycle. With where my wrist and hand position is on the bars. It was interesting. I was doing way more road riding than I was mountain biking until recently. I got back on the mountain bike, and I wasn't even thinking about it. I was like, it's my position on the road bike, on the brake hoods, on the bars. As I'm cruising down the road, I'm in extension in some cases, and then when I go out to the hoods, I'd still be in extension, only I'd be at an angle and putting more. I'd be putting more tension because I'd be gripping more medial with my pinky and my ring finger, and so my medial elbow was really bothering me. So I wasn't doing a bunch of that. The schedule changed a little bit. I got off the bike a little while. I got back to my lifting. I had to work around some things. Pull-ups were not having it for me. Even if I strapped up, it wasn't. I wasn't doing so. I wasn't doing a lot of pull-ups. I had to move to the bar so I could have a little bit. It was a little narrower bar. So we have like 1.25 inches to we have up to 2-inch bar that we pull up on in the gym. We've had bars built that are bigger diameter to challenge grip strength. And the size bars and my body weight were not happening. So what I did was I moved over to the pull down machine, right? And I was able to grab the bar that made the most sense for me and adjust my position on that bar in order to adjust my grip so that I could still pull vertically without bothering my elbows. But here's the thing. I got back on my mountain bike. I wasn't even thinking about it. And fuck if it didn't show up again.
Really?
Yeah, it's been bothering me. So I went to do pull-ups last night again, and after it kind of fired up a little bit, I'm like, damn, it's back. It came back like that. So it's really frustrating, right? So for those people out there that know what I'm talking about or have had anything similar, it's frustrating. And to your point, Jeff, here's the thing. I just kind of worked around it.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't really, and I haven't really addressed it.
Because why would you work around it when you need to do pull-ups? I need big lats.
Right. But I was working around. I hadn't really been addressing it the way I need to. And here's the thing, and I'm sure people can relate to this too. It's like, look, my workout time, the time that I spend working out it's condensed now. I have to be very organized in the time that I spend. But just in my routine and how I do things and what I'm trying to achieve. So the first thing that goes, in your program, if you start lacking time, is you stop stretching, right? You stop working your mobility. You stop working your corrective exercise.
Warm up shortens.
Right. You got to make sure, because you got to make sure you get the bench press in. You got to make sure you get the deadlift in and the squat in and all those other things, right? So I don't got time for this other shit. And here it is showing up again. It's not better. It just, the pain signal was decreased enough for long enough to where I'd kind of forgotten about it. And I'd helped it relax to a certain extent, but clearly there's still some weakness in there. And so going back to those lines, those muscle and tendon lines as they roll through the body, if I'm in that extension at the keyboard or flexion at the keyboard, or on a bicycle, a motorcycle, even on the jiu-jitsu mat, because there's a lot of flexion in jiu-jitsu.
Gripping,
right? From the gripping, right? And I used to have some different issues like with my thumbs there. Learning how to train your grip, right? And work some mobility exercises. We were talking with Tony Ryan a couple weeks, it's not even a couple weeks. I think it's like
last week.
Maybe a week and a half ago now, where we had him in and he was walking through some things to help with wrist and hand mobility as well as strengthening. There's different things you can do. So we should talk about how to sort of correct some of these things outside of just the workarounds, which you guys did a really good job of. You kind of started walking down that path, Jeff, with the finger spreaders. Anybody that's like knows we have like a thing about feet, like we're really into feet in terms of the fitness perspective. Outside of that, I think feet are disgusting. But if you've ever gotten into foot strengthening, right, and strengthening the arches in your feet or the function within your foot, you've seen these little toe spreaders that you can put on. Not the ones that sit in between your toes after you go
manicure or pedicure, whatever.
Yeah, I know you have a whole bunch of those.
I know. Friday night sundress.
You get those, the Friday night sundress thing. Not those. You actually have to create the separation, right? So these little rings go around each digit, and you separate and pull them apart to create.
It's not a passive block that separates your fingers. It's you actively spreading them.
So that's one way to start to strengthen the extensors. Again, the extensors are what counterbalance the flexors. So your flexors are being overworked, right? They're tight, right? And the extensors become weak, and there's now a disconnect between, let's just say, the strength profile on the backside would be like quads to hamstrings.
Yeah, and you could have vice versa on that too.
1,000%, depending on what you're. If you're a person that turns wrenches all day and screwdrivers and stuff like that, just running skill saws or swinging a hammer, you might have different types of. You might actually have more lateral elbow pain than medial elbow pain. So let's go through some things that you can do that may not require you to get one of these finger spreaders. What are some of the basic things that you could do to start strengthening and mobilizing and stretching? Because there could be some flexibility stuff that needs to happen there.
I think the oldest one, is easily the barbell wrist curl and wrist extension, right? So if you're holding your hand, you can have it on your knee. You can be standing behind your back with a barbell, dumbbell, whatever. But I'm going to allow the dumbbell to come into my fingers. I'm going to extend almost into a straight hand so I don't drop the dumbbell, obviously. Curl up through my fingers, come into wrist flexion, right? Squeeze, come back down. I can do the opposite. I turn my arm around, get it on something flat, lift up my knee. I can do it standing, whatever. Right.
I remember.
Those are bodybuilding programs.
I remember my dad introducing me to, because my dad had giant forearms and big, strong hands, still does. And like he used to do a ton of wrist curling and reverse wrist curling. Yeah. We used to, those were in the program.
You don't see it anymore.
When I talk about the first program I ever had where we were taking measurements and stuff like that, fucking wrist curls were in there.
Forearm,
It's great. So that is a really great exercise and accessible to a lot of people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dumbbell or a barbell. Yeah. Anything, any tube, or any piece of
you can start with
any
your
bar,
hand, your body
round bar.
Yep.
You could use it. Yeah, tubing that's attached. There's different ways to do it. I like the barbell because or the dumbbell because if you don't have good supination, right, and you get that bar in your hand and you can't fully supinate to where that would be like your hands being flat facing the sky, then you're going to be forcing a lot of rotation that you might not have, and you might not start to feel that more through your extensors on the other side because you just don't have that mobility to get there. So the dumbbell allows you to work one side at a time, and obviously isolate more on the side or do more work.
Because you're going to have a weaker side, and to be honest, start off with the dumbbell. It's just going to give you more awareness on each side. And you can get up to the barbell. The barbell is really to add weight, and once you have good stability and control of that movement.
Right, because most standard barbells in a gym are 45 pounds.
Exactly.
Right?
And even if you get to the fixed barbells, you have the 20 and 30 pounds. I mean, still it's going to take scapular awareness. What's going, you know what I mean? It's a more
advanced.
Exactly.
Yeah. Technically, it is a little bit more advanced because you're working with heavier loads, and again, now you're fixed versus having a little bit more autonomy or range with the one. So that's one way. We talked about tubing a little bit. Talked about kind of any type of round bar. What we didn't really talk about is just mobilizing those things and getting them to work before you start working. So just doing some simple, rotation through your wrists before you get going out on the floor before you go work out. Get things mobilized. Maybe get a little bit of weight in your hands and go through that reverse wrist curling and reverse wrist curling in order to wake things up a little bit, not fatigue them, but to wake them up.
Exactly.
Yes. So you said mobilize your wrists, mobilize your elbows, but also when you're doing these exercises, doing it with your elbows bent, but then also doing it with your elbows straight because some of those elbow extensors and flexors, they do.
They run through the joint.
They run through the joint. So you're going to feel it completely different when your elbows are flexed versus when your elbows are straight. So a little bit of nuance there.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you're looking at like FRC and the way that they do it, you have straight down, supination, pronation, up, right? Try to stand up, but it's more of a flexion, going through supination, extension, and then you rotate and change at the top. It's just things like this going through the motion of supination, flexion, extension of the elbow.
Yeah, so there's, again, good ways to kind of get things awake while also shutting down some of that overactivity signal that's happening here. Again, the reason it's tight is because it's constantly getting a signal that says stay tight. You could liken it to, again, like hip flexors to hip extensors, right? Your hip flexor group starts to become very tight while the extensor group starts to kind of shut down and let go a little bit. So again, just kind of warming up a little bit. And then at the end, maybe going back through some of these exercises, focusing a little bit after you've needed that larger amount of strength to do your bigger pulls or pushes or whatever.
And
again,
that's where you can really like go after strength, you know. You don't want to kill it before.
Correct. Yeah. So again, the first part was just about activating, loosening up, kind of gauging.
Increase blood flow.
Gauging where you are for the day. That's creating awareness. Then go out there, get your workout done. At the end, you can add in some of these ancillary movements, wrist curls, reverse wrist curls, from like a working set perspective, and start to gauge like how much, where's my threshold? Like how much do I push before I get more pain or less pain? And then finish off with maybe going through some like flexibility type of work where you're putting things on stretch. And again, most people need to put the flexors on stretch. One of the things I like to do is super simple. I just get down onto the floor into a quadruped, that'd be hands and knees on the floor. And I start with just putting my wrists or my hands just out in front of my shoulders a little bit. It's a good place to start because that'll create there'll be less wrist extension when my hands are just in front of my shoulders. And then all I have to do is just kind of rock my hips forward, push out over the tops of my hands. So I go into more extension, more into a 90 degrees at the wrist and forearm there, and kind of feel where that is. And then from there, what I can do is just kind of work my hands. I can rotate my hands internally, externally to find out where the stretch works the best for me, right? And where I'm feeling maybe a little bit of relief, a little bit of extra tension without hurting. Like it shouldn't hurt, but you feel like kind of that relief of, oh, wow. Like, again, like if you're laying down on the floor, go back to hip flexors, extensors, somebody's stretching your hamstring. And there's a point where you're like, oh, that kind of feels good. It's like a quote unquote good hurt. And then there's that threshold where you're like, okay, that is way too much.
Back off, right?
Way too much.
Like, you'll know.
So what I find is if I can completely externally rotate my shoulder, that is the fingertips are working away from the middle.
And elbow crease.
And exactly, and elbow crease. So I'm going outside. And so the elbow crease is starting to kind of rotate around and face forward out in front of me. So, effectively my fingers are, what I'd like to get to is backwards, right? I like to get into there and find where that stretch feels good. But what I'm always trying to challenge myself, when that thumb starts to pick up off the floor and you can't go any further, then you've gone too far. Right? You're beyond, you're beyond your range. So make sure you're spreading your fingers, you're keeping them spread. That's important. Working that palm all the way around while keeping that finger spread. If you start to see the thumb work its way in towards your index finger or start to pick up off the turf or the mat or whatever it is that you're, the floor, whatever it is that you're down on, then you got a little too far. Work your way back. That I also like to do that at the beginning of my workout, to be honest with you, just kind of feel how tight am I for the day.
Absolutely.
That's like my assessment.
It's a check-in.
Yeah, it's like my assessment.
Why wouldn't you check in with something that you're going to train that day? I just make, like, how's my lumbar spine today? Do I have good awareness there? Like,
I want to go back to, going back to awareness, checking in, and what I was mentioning before, what gets cut out when you're not doing, when you're maybe you're short on time or you're bored or you're just not connected for the day. Again, going back, like if you're addressing your mobility and your flexibility at all, and you should be doing that a little bit at the beginning and probably a little bit at the end, right? This does not take much. Like part of my warm up is I'm on the floor warming up. So I have my, my basic movement routine that I go through, and that stretching through the forearms and the hands and the wrists. It just is part of it. I'm already down doing, say, like a down dog or a reach through a world's greatest or some hip flexor stretch.
Just adding it in.
It takes a few seconds for me, or a minute to get in there and do that. And that minute I find is generally well spent. That's also a good way to sort of judge, or like I said, evaluate what your wrist and hand, extension looks like. Where you control everything. I have seen people do this or try to do this on the wall standing.
It's a rough one.
I find that to be problematic. Where they'll turn so they'll be standing in front of the wall, right? And they'll go into that external rotation to the shoulder and they're trying to push into the wall versus being on all fours. You'll have a little bit more control, I think, on all fours. That's my opinion, than you will standing. I think you'll be stabilized because you are closed chained, right? Versus being upright and you're open.
And then the scapulas, I just see a big issue there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They start to ride up.
Yeah,
next thing you know, that's a good point to make. Like when you're standing, I always see this. So when
Yeah.
you're on your forearm, or excuse me, when you're on all fours, you generally don't see this, and
It's
that is
usually lock and
all of a
right.
sudden that hand that's turning upside down, the shoulder starts to ride up into their ear,
Yeah.
right? You got to keep that shoulder down. Otherwise, you're just compensating up and down to find more range. So all ways to work. We talked about, hey, let's keep you working out. Let's try and work around this a little bit. CC provided some good alternatives there. Again, with index and ring finger, or index and middle finger and thumb versus ring finger and pinky, depending on where that pain is. Jeff, hey, the reason you're here is likely because you're weak. Think about the keyboard time that you spend, or the time you spend on your phone.
Oh yeah, all of
for
it.
sure.
Driving, all that stuff. And then we work through a few ways to strengthen and come out the other side. So hopefully that helps people rid themselves of some elbow pain while not having to stop working out and being too frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely.